A Chinese girl marries the poorest rancher. Then he leads her into a mysterious forest. Lian had always been surrounded by luxury. Born into a family of great wealth in China, she lived in a sprawling mansion, with servants who catered to her every need. Her life had always been planned out for her, studying at the best schools, attending high-class parties, and getting ready to marry someone with the same social status. Yet, no matter how perfect her life seemed from the outside, Lian felt something was missing. She didn't know why, but there was a yearning deep inside her that she couldn't ignore. While her parents were focused on building their family's business empire, Lian often found herself in quiet corners of her home, lost in books, wondering what life beyond wealth and fame was like. Her family had always taught her to value success, to see money as the key to happiness. But Lian wasn't sure anymore. She felt trapped by her own family's expectations. One afternoon, as Lian sat near a large window looking out at the estate's well-kept gardens, her thoughts were interrupted by her mother. "Lian," her mother called out from the door, "I have arranged for you to meet someone today." Lian raised an eyebrow. She already knew what was coming. Her mother had been setting up dates for her with men from wealthy families for months, hoping to find the perfect match. "Who is it this time?" she asked, her voice flat. "A good match," her mother smiled. "You'll meet him at the banquet tonight. He's from a respectable family. I think you'll like him." Lian sighed. She had no interest in another meeting with a man she didn't care about, but she knew how important it was to her mother. So, with a resigned smile, she agreed to go. That night at the banquet, Lian was introduced to a man named Ethan. He was nothing like the men she had met before. Tall, broad-shouldered, and rugged in a way that was both strange and comforting to Lian. He was the son of a rancher, but what caught Lian's attention most wasn't his appearance. It was the sadness in his eyes. There was a deep sorrow there, like he had been through something, yet was trying to carry on as if everything was normal. Ethan was different. He wasn't wearing an expensive suit or boasting about his achievements. In fact, he barely spoke about himself. Instead, he listened attentively as Lian spoke about her life. And for the first time in a long time, Lian felt someone truly paying attention. His quiet, unassuming nature was a stark contrast to the men she had been introduced to in the past. And, for reasons she couldn't understand, Lian felt drawn to him. The evening passed in a haze of polite conversation and delicate glances. Ethan didn't speak much, but Lian noticed how his eyes seemed to wander outside the window, as if something out there called to him. She found herself wondering what his life was really like, far away from the glittering world she was part of. After the banquet, Lian's mother praised Ethan's family and spoke of how he would be a suitable match for Lian. But Lian, though she had felt a spark with him, didn't want to marry him. He was too different, too mysterious. But the more she thought about him, the more she felt a curiosity growing inside her. What was it about him that intrigued her so much? In the days that followed, Lian found herself thinking about Ethan more and more. His silence, the sadness in his eyes, and the way he seemed out of place in the world she knew. Everything about him pulled at her heart. One afternoon, as she walked through the gardens of her family home, she found herself standing at the edge of a small pond. She had come out to clear her mind, but now she had more questions than answers. It was then that she received a message from Ethan. He had invited her to visit his ranch, and for some reason, Lian agreed. She didn't know why, but she felt as if she needed to see him again. Perhaps, she thought, there was something more to him than just a quiet, reserved man from a poor family. Maybe she could understand him better if she saw his life for herself. The day she arrived at Ethan's ranch was the first time she had truly stepped into a world far from her own. The house was small and old, tucked away on the edge of a wide stretch of land. The ranch itself was nothing like the well-maintained estates she was used to. The fields were overgrown, the barn in need of repairs, and the house looked like it had been forgotten by time. Yet there was a charm to the place that Lian couldn't deny. Ethan greeted her with a smile, but it was a smile tinged with weariness. He showed her around the ranch, explaining the work he did every day to keep the place running. There was no talk of wealth or status here, just hard, honest work. Leanne could see how much effort he put into caring for the land and animals. She was amazed by his dedication, his quiet determination to keep going even when things seemed difficult. As the afternoon wore on, Leon began to feel a sense of peace she had never experienced before. There was no pressure here, no expectations. It was just Ethan and his ranch, and she realized that for the first time in a long time, she felt at ease. It was as if Ethan's world, though humble, was a place where she could finally be herself, without the weight of her family's demands. Later that evening, after a simple but delicious meal, Ethan took Leanne outside. The stars were out in full force, twinkling in the clear sky. The air was cool and refreshing. Ethan spoke softly, almost to himself, as he looked up at the sky. "There's a lot of history in this land," he said. "More than most people realize. My family's been here for generations." Leon listened, fascinated by his words. She knew nothing of ranching or the history of the land, but there was something about Ethan's connection to the place that made it feel important. It was a part of him, and in a way, it felt like he was sharing a piece of himself with her. As they stood there together, Leanne felt something stirring within her. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive, as if she had found a purpose that had nothing to do with wealth or status. It wasn't just Ethan she was beginning to feel drawn to. It was the life he had chosen, the life that seemed so far removed from her own. But just as she was starting to feel comfortable, a thought crossed her mind. Could she really marry a man like Ethan? He was poor, and her family would never approve. They had always told her that marriage was about security, about joining families with shared wealth and status. But here she was, standing beside a man who had nothing but his land and his hard work. For the first time in her life, Leanne felt torn between two worlds. The life her parents had planned for her, and the life she was discovering for herself with Ethan. She didn't know what to do, but she knew that something deep inside her was changing. Before she left the ranch, Ethan took her hand and looked into her eyes. "I know I'm not the man your family would choose for you," he said, his voice low. "But I'll never ask you to give up who you are. I just want you to know that if you choose to stay here, you'll be with someone who will always care for you." Leon's heart swelled with emotion as she looked at him. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment she felt a connection to Ethan that went deeper than anything she had ever experienced. As she walked back to her family's home that evening, she realized that her life would never be the same again. The man who had once seemed so out of place in her world was now someone she couldn't stop thinking about. Leanne had never imagined that a life far from the glittering world she knew could feel so peaceful. Yet here she was, standing in the middle of a wide field, surrounded by the sounds of nature. The rustling leaves, the chirping of birds, and the occasional low moo of a cow all combined to create a feeling of calm that she had never experienced before. It was as though the land itself was welcoming her. The days after her visit to Ethan's ranch were filled with mixed emotions. Leon's mind was still occupied with thoughts of her family, her future, and the life she was expected to lead. But something about Ethan and his quiet, humble world kept calling to her. As the days passed, the draw became stronger. After much consideration, Leanne made a decision that surprised even herself. She would stay at the ranch with Ethan. It was a choice that seemed to go against everything her family had planned for her, but deep down, she knew it was the right one. The moment she arrived at the ranch for good, Leanne was struck by the reality of what she had chosen. The house was small, not at all like the grand mansion she was used to. The walls creaked and the floors were uneven. There was a wood-burning stove in the kitchen, not a sleek, modern oven. There was no polished marble or glass, no sparkling chandeliers. Instead, there were simple wooden tables, mismatched chairs, and shelves filled with tools and books. It was far from luxurious, but it had a charm that Leanne couldn't deny. Ethan greeted her with a smile that seemed both proud and nervous. "You're really here?" he said, a mixture of surprise and happiness in his voice. Leanne smiled back, trying to hide her nervousness. For the first few days, everything felt overwhelming. Leanne had spent most of her life in the comfort of her family's wealth, and the idea of working on a ranch was completely foreign to her. She had no idea how to take care of animals or maintain the land. She had been pampered her whole life, used to having servants do everything for her. Now she was expected to roll up her sleeves and get to work. Ethan, ever patient, showed her the basics. They started with the animals. He led her to the barn where a few cows and chickens were kept. "You'll need to feed 'em every morning," he said. "The cows need fresh hay, and the chickens need their grain. It's not much, but it's important." Leon nodded, although she felt a knot in her stomach. Feeding the animals sounded simple enough, but she was unsure if she could do it. She was used to eating food that had been prepared for her, not preparing it herself. The thought of mucking out stalls and tending to the animals made her feel uncertain, but she was determined not to give up. The next morning, Ethan showed her how to fill the troughs with hay for the cows. Leanne struggled with the heavy bales, but with Ethan's help, she managed to get them into the troughs. As she worked, she began to realize how much effort it took to run the ranch. It wasn't just about feeding the animals. It was about maintaining the entire farm, ensuring the crops grew, and managing the land. Ethan's life was not easy, and neither would hers be if she stayed. But there was something about the simplicity of it all that appealed to her. At first, Leanne made plenty of mistakes. She dropped the grain in the wrong spots, spilled water, and got the hay tangled in knots. Each time, Ethan was there to help her, offering encouragement when she felt discouraged.
"Don't worry about it."
"You'll get the hang of it," he would say with a smile. He never once judged her for her lack of experience, and that made all the difference. Days turned into weeks, and Leon began to feel more comfortable with her new life. Slowly, she learned the rhythms of the ranch, the early mornings, the work with the animals, and the quiet evenings when the day's tasks were done. But it wasn't just the work that was changing her. It was the way Ethan lived. He didn't complain about his struggles. Even when the weather was harsh and the work seemed endless, he never lost his sense of purpose. He took pride in his land, in the animals, and in the quiet moments of peace that came after a long day of hard work. One evening, after a long day of planting seeds in the fields, Leanne sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The air was cool, and the sky was painted with shades of orange and purple. They sat in silence for a while, simply enjoying the view. "You know," Ethan said softly, "most people think life on a ranch is easy. They see the land and think it's just about growing crops and raising animals. But it's much more than that. It's about respect. Respect for the land, for the animals, and for the hard work that goes into keeping it all going." Leanne listened carefully, her mind turning over his words. She had never thought of it that way. To her, the land had always seemed like something to be owned, something to be controlled. But now, living on the ranch, she understood that it wasn't about ownership. It was about stewardship. The land gave back what you put into it, but only if you treated it with care and respect. The next day, Leanne woke up early, determined to prove to herself that she could handle the ranch life. She fed the cows, cleaned the barn, and worked the fields alongside Ethan. By the time the sun was high in the sky, she was exhausted, but there was a sense of accomplishment in her heart. She had come a long way from the woman who had arrived here, unsure of how to handle the simplest tasks. But even as she worked alongside Ethan, Leanne couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. It wasn't the work of blood, it wasn't the quiet days or the slow pace of life on the ranch. It was her connection to the world she had left behind. She missed her family, missed the fine clothes and lavish dinners, missed the comfort and security that came with wealth. One day, Leanne decided to visit her family. She knew they would be shocked to see her living on a ranch, away from the comforts of home. But she needed to know if she had made the right decision. Could she really give up the life of luxury for a future with Ethan? A future that seemed so different from what she had imagined. When she arrived at her family's mansion, she was greeted with cold, disapproving stares. Her mother was the first to speak. "Leanne, what is this? What have you done with yourself?" she asked, her voice dripping with disbelief. Leanne looked at her mother, trying to keep her emotions in check. "I've chosen to stay with Ethan," she said quietly. "I'm happy here." Her mother's face twisted in disgust. Happy in that run-down shack with that man? He has nothing to offer you, Leanne. This isn't a life. It's a mistake. The word stung, but Leanne didn't flinch. She had expected this reaction. Her mother's world was built on appearances, on wealth and status, and the idea of Leanne living a humble life with Ethan went against everything she had been taught. But Leanne didn't care. She had found something here that money could never buy: peace, purpose, and a connection to something real. As she left her family's mansion and returned to the ranch, Leanne felt a sense of relief wash over her. She had made her decision, and nothing could change it. The ranch was her home now, and Ethan was the man she wanted to be with. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she was ready for whatever came next. The land, the animals, and the quiet strength of Ethan were now part of her life. And though she had a long way to go before she truly felt at home in this world, Leanne was beginning to understand that sometimes the best things in life weren't the ones you could buy. They were the things you worked for, the things that grew slowly but surely, just like the crops in the fields. The days on the ranch had slowly become part of Leanne's routine. She had come to cherish the rhythm of life, the quiet mornings, the work in the fields, and the evenings spent with Ethan, when they would talk about anything and everything, or simply sit in the stillness. Life was no longer about the noise and bustle of her past. It was about the peace and simplicity of the ranch, and slowly, very slowly, she was beginning to feel that she had found a place where she truly belonged. But there were still moments when Leanne missed the world she had left behind. The elegant dinners, the parties, the city lights, and the comfort of being surrounded by people who understood her. The ranch was beautiful, but it was also isolating at times. The nearest town was miles away, and although Ethan's presence filled the space, there was a quiet emptiness in the air, something unspoken between them. One evening, as Leanne finished the evening chores, Ethan came to her with an unexpected proposal. He had always been a man of few words, his expressions often reserved, but tonight he seemed almost hesitant. "Leanne," he began, his voice low, "I want to take you somewhere tomorrow. It's a place I've never shown anyone before." Leanne looked up from the feed bucket she had been holding, surprised by his sudden request.
"Where?" she asked, wiping her hands on a rag.
"There's a forest not far from here," he said, his eyes briefly shifting away, as if troubled by something in the memory. "It's old, deep. My family's always stayed away from it, but I think you should see it. I think you'll understand something about this land if you do." The mention of the forest caught Leanne's attention. She had heard Ethan mention it once or twice, but he had always changed the subject when she asked about it. He seemed almost afraid of the place, and that only intrigued her more. "Why have you stayed away from it?" she asked, feeling a sense of curiosity bubbling inside her. Ethan hesitated. His lips pressed together, and he looked as though he was wrestling with his own thoughts. "It's not a place to take lightly," he said finally, his tone serious. "But I trust you, Leanne. I think you need to see it for yourself." The next morning, after a quick breakfast, Ethan led Leanne to the edge of the ranch, where a narrow path wound through tall trees and thick underbrush. The air was fresh, and the morning mist had just begun to lift. Leanne's heart beat a little faster as they walked together, her curiosity growing with every step. As they moved further from the ranch, the land began to change. The trees grew taller, their branches twisting together to form a canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. The air was cooler, and the ground beneath their feet was soft with moss. It felt as though they were walking into another world, one that was untouched and ancient. Ethan didn't speak much as they walked, but Leanne could sense that he was deep in thought. There was something in the way he moved, almost as if he were trying to make himself invisible to the forest. It was strange. She had never seen him so quiet, so distant. The closer they got to the heart of the forest, the more it seemed as if the very atmosphere changed around them, becoming heavier, more oppressive. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of walking, they reached a clearing. In the center stood an old cabin, its wooden walls worn by time and the elements. Vines had crept up its sides, and the roof was sagging in places, but it was still standing. Leanne stood in awe, staring at the structure. There was something about it, something ancient and mysterious. Ethan stopped a few feet from the cabin and looked at Leanne. "This is it," he said softly. "This is where my family lived. It's been abandoned for generations." Leanne took a few cautious steps forward, her heart pounding. "What happened here?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The place felt alive in a way she couldn't explain, as if it held secrets that had been buried for years. Ethan stood beside her, his expression unreadable. "There are things in this forest that are better left unexplained," he said, his voice tense. "My family made a pact with the land a long time ago. They promised to protect the forest, to care for it, but not all promises are meant to last." Leon turned to him, her eyes wide with confusion. "What kind of promise?" Ethan sighed, looking out at the cabin. "It's a promise that binds us to this place," he said, his voice heavy. "It's a bond that's been passed down through generations, one that has tied my family to the forest, to the land itself. But I've always felt like we were being watched, like we weren't supposed to be here. And yet, we've stayed. We've always stayed." Leanne felt a chill run down her spine as she took in his words. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath, as if it were listening. The trees stood so still that they almost seemed like statues, their gnarled branches stretching toward the sky. It was as if the forest were alive, watching, waiting. "I don't understand," Leanne said, her voice trembling slightly. "Why would your family make such a promise? What does it have to do with us?" Ethan was silent for a long time, and when he spoke again, his voice was softer, as if he were confessing something he had never shared with anyone. "The forest, it has a power," he said slowly. "A force that is beyond what anyone understands. My family has always known that, and we've done our best to respect it, to live with it. But some things are out of our control." Leanne's mind raced. The air around them felt thick, charged with something unknown. She looked at Ethan, her eyes searching for answers, but he seemed distant, lost in his thoughts. There was so much more he wasn't telling her, but she didn't know how to press him further. "I brought you here because I think you need to know the truth," Ethan said, finally meeting her gaze. "The ranch, the land, it's all connected. It's not just a place where we live, it's a part of us, a part of who we are. And the forest, it's always been there, always watching over us." Leanne stood quietly, taking in the weight of his words. She had always thought of the land as something to be used, something to be worked, but now standing here in the heart of the forest, she began to understand that there was much more to it than she had ever imagined. The land, the forest, it wasn't just a backdrop to their lives. It was a living, breathing entity, and it had its own secrets.
Ethan turned and walked toward the cabin, motioning for Leanne to follow.
As they stepped inside, the air grew colder and the silence seemed to deepen. The cabin was simple, with a stone fireplace at one end and a wooden table in the center. There were remnants of old furniture, but everything was covered in dust, as if the place had been forgotten for years. "This was where my family lived," Ethan said, his voice barely audible. "It's where I spent much of my childhood. But it's also where everything changed." Leanne felt a shiver run through her as she looked around the room. It was clear that no one had lived here for a long time. But there was something about the place that felt alive. She could almost feel the history pressing against her, and for a moment she wondered if she had made a mistake in coming here. "I'll explain everything, Leon," Ethan said, turning to her. "But not here. Not now. This place is too heavy. It's best if we leave." Reluctantly, Leanne followed him out of the cabin and back into the forest. The way back felt different, as if the trees were closing in on them, watching their every move. The forest was no longer just a place of curiosity. It was a place of mystery, a place that had been intertwined with Ethan's family for generations. As they returned to the ranch, Leanne couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. She had seen a side of Ethan that was deeper, darker, and more mysterious than she had ever known, and she couldn't help but wonder what other secrets the forest held, and what role she would play in the unfolding story of Ethan's family and the land they had sworn to protect. The days after their visit to the forest cabin felt heavier than before. Leanne couldn't shake the unease that had settled in her chest since Ethan had shared the story of his family's connection to the land. The forest no longer felt like a simple stretch of trees and plants. It had become something more, something deeper. She began to see the world around her differently. The trees weren't just trees. The land wasn't just land. It was all interconnected in ways she had never understood before. She spent more time with Ethan, but he was distant. His quiet nature had always been part of him, but now it felt like something was holding him back, as though he was carrying a burden too heavy to share. Leanne knew he was struggling, and although he had promised to explain everything, she couldn't help but feel like he was keeping something important from her. One evening, as the sun began to set and the ranch fell into the calm of twilight, Leanne decided to confront him. They were sitting on the porch, sipping tea, the cool evening air mixing with the warmth of the cabin. Leanne could hear the wind rustling through the trees, but it wasn't the comforting sound she had once found soothing. Now it felt more like a whisper, like the forest was trying to tell her something. "Ethan," she began softly, placing her cup on the wooden table in front of them. He didn't look up immediately, but she could tell he had heard her. "You promised me that you would tell me everything. But it feels like you're holding something back. I need to know, Ethan. I need to understand." Ethan looked at her then, his eyes shadowed with something Leanne couldn't read. He sighed deeply as though the weight of the world was resting on his shoulders. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've kept this secret for too long. But it's not just my secret, Leon. It's a secret that belongs to my family, to the land, and even to you now. I never wanted to involve you in this. But the truth is, you already are." Leanne leaned forward, her heart pounding.
What do you mean?
"How am I involved in this?" Ethan's gaze flickered toward the forest, his expression distant. "My family's bond with the forest goes back generations. It's not just a promise. It's a curse. The pact that was made with the land all those years ago binds us to it in ways that no one can fully understand. We protect it, and it protects us. But the land is ancient, and there are forces here that we can't control." Leanne's mind raced as she tried to process his words. A curse? Forces they couldn't control? She had always known that there was something unique about this place, but she had never imagined it was tied to something as dark as a curse.
"Why didn't you tell me this before?" Leanne asked, her voice trembling.
"Why keep it a secret?" Ethan ran a hand through his hair, looking weary.
Because it's dangerous.
"The forest, it doesn't just take care of the land. It watches us. It knows who we are, what we need, and it has a way of making sure we don't forget our place. The land gives, but it also takes, and it's always been this way. My family learned to live with it, to respect it. But there are moments, Leanne, when the forest demands more than we can give." Leanne swallowed, trying to steady her racing heart. "What does it want? What does the forest demand?" Ethan turned back to face her, his eyes dark with something that made Leanne's stomach twist. "It wants balance. For years my family has honored the pact. We've kept the land thriving, worked the soil, cared for the animals. But every generation, the forest asks for something in return. It's not something we can control. It's something we must accept." Leon's mind was spinning. The land had demands? And what was Ethan's role in all of this? He had been living this life, bound to the forest, with no choice but to follow the rules. But what did that mean for their future together? "Do you think I'm part of this?" she asked, her voice small. "Am I part of the pact too now?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Instead, he stood and walked to the edge of the porch, staring out at the forest. The last light of the day was fading, and the shadows grew long, stretching across the land like dark fingers. "I didn't want you to get involved," he said quietly, "but there's something about you, Leanne. Something that ties you to this land. I can't explain it, but I felt it since the day we met. I've tried to ignore it, to keep you out of it. But the truth is, the forest knows you're here now. It's already marked you." Leanne's heart skipped a beat. "Marked me?" Ethan turned to her, his eyes filled with sorrow. "Yes. The forest knows when someone belongs to it, and when it marks someone, it's a sign that they're tied to the land. It's not something you can run from. It's not something anyone can escape." Leanne felt a chill creep over her. She had never believed in such things. Curses, markings, ancient pacts. But the way Ethan spoke, the way the forest seemed to press in on them, made her question everything she thought she knew. It was as if the land itself were alive, watching them, waiting.
I don't understand, she whispered. What does this mean for us? Ethan stepped closer, his gaze intense.
It means that you're not just my wife. You're a part of this land now, Leanne. Whether you accept it or not, the forest is bound to you, just like it's bound to me. And one day, you'll have to make a choice. You'll have to decide whether you want to stay here, with me, and honor the pact, or whether you'll leave and risk everything. Leanne felt a lump form in her throat. The weight of his words hung heavily in the air. This was no longer just about them, about their love or their future together. It was about something much bigger, something that neither of them could control. And Leanne was trapped in the middle of it. I don't know what to do, she admitted, her voice shaking. I love you, Ethan, but I don't know if I can live with this. I don't know if I can live with the forest watching over me, making demands, and knowing that I'm tied to it in ways I don't understand. Ethan's expression softened, and he took her hands in his.
I understand, Leon.
I never wanted to drag you into this, but the truth is, we're both here now. And we both have to face it. The forest doesn't give us an option to leave. It doesn't let us escape. It has its rules, and we have to follow them. Leanne closed her eyes, trying to calm the whirlwind of thoughts racing through her mind. She had left everything behind to be with Ethan, to start a new life. But now that new life was tangled in something far beyond her control, something dark and ancient. She didn't know if she could handle it. She didn't know if she was strong enough to face the power of the forest. I need time, she said quietly, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. I need time to understand this, to understand what it means for me, for us. Ethan nodded, his expression gentle. Take all the time you need, Leanne. But know this, whatever happens, I'm not leaving. This land, this forest, it's all a part of me, and it's a part of you now, too. We'll face it together, whatever it is. As they sat together in the dimming light, Leanne couldn't help but feel that their journey was only beginning. The forest had marked her, and now there was no turning back. She had chosen this life with Ethan, but now she would have to face the truth of what that choice meant, not just for their love, but for their very survival. The forest had its secrets, and it was waiting for them to uncover them. And Leanne knew, with a sinking feeling, that the answers they were looking for were buried deep within the trees, hidden away in the shadows of the past. The days following their conversation about the forest felt heavy with the weight of Ethan's words. Leanne couldn't stop thinking about the truth he had revealed to her. The forest, the pact, the ancient forces at play. It was all so much to process. She had come to the ranch looking for peace and a new life, but now she found herself caught in something that seemed too big, too powerful to escape. It wasn't just about her love for Ethan anymore. It was about her place in the world, her connection to the land, and the choices that lay ahead. Ethan had given her space, understanding that she needed time to process everything. He still worked the land with his usual quiet determination, but there was an air of sadness around him. Leon could see the burden he carried, the weight of generations of promises and obligations. She had never fully understood what it meant to be tied to something so powerful, so ancient, until now. One evening after a long day of work in the fields, Leanne found herself standing at the edge of the forest once more. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the land. The trees seemed to stretch higher into the sky, their leaves whispering in the wind. She had never felt so small, so insignificant, in the presence of something so vast. Ethan approached quietly from behind, his footsteps soft on the ground. "Leanne," he said, his voice gentle, "are you ready to talk?" Leanne turned to face him, her heart heavy. "I don't know if I'm ready," she admitted, "but I have to make a choice, don't I?"
Ethan nodded slowly.
"Yes, the forest is patient, but it won't wait forever. It's not just about us anymore, Leanne. It's about the land, the forest. It's a part of everything, and the pact is part of who we are. The choices we make now will shape everything that comes after. Leanne looked out at the trees, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on her. She had always lived a life of comfort, surrounded by certainty. But now, everything was different. She wasn't just living on a ranch. She wasn't just with Ethan. She was tied to something far greater, something that had been there long before her and would continue long after. "I love you, Ethan," Leanne said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know if I can live with this curse, this pact. I don't understand it, and I don't know if I can accept it." Ethan stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "I don't expect you to understand it all right away, but the forest isn't something we can fight. It's part of us. It's been here long before we were born, and it will be here long after we're gone. But it's not just about the forest. It's about us, about what we choose to do with the time we have." Leanne felt a knot form in her stomach.
"And if I can't live with it?"
"What happens then?" Ethan's expression softened, and he squeezed her hands gently. "Then we leave. We walk away, and we let the forest do what it will. But I don't think we can leave. Not really. I think the forest is tied to us, Leanne. You're as much a part of this land as I am now. And when you love someone, truly love them, you don't just leave. You stay, and you fight for what matters." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a sense of ancient wisdom. Leanne closed her eyes, trying to make sense of everything. The land, the forest, the curse, it was all too much. But in her heart, she knew Ethan was right. She had made a choice when she came to the ranch. She had chosen to be with him, to live a life that was different from the one her family had planned for her. And now she had to choose again, this time for both of them. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," Leanne said, her voice shaking. "I don't know if I can live with the forest watching me, controlling everything. But I don't want to lose you. I don't want to walk away from this life we've built together." Ethan smiled, a soft, reassuring smile. "You're stronger than you know, Leanne. The forest won't break us. It's a part of us, but it's not who we are. We make our own choices. We decide what happens next." Leanne took a deep breath, looking at the forest once more. She had always been afraid of the unknown, of the things she couldn't control. But standing here, with Ethan beside her, she realized that life was never about controlling everything. It was about accepting what came, making the best of it, and finding strength in the face of uncertainty.
"I'm ready,"
she said finally, her voice steady. "I'm ready to face this, whatever it is, with you." Ethan's eyes lit up with relief, and he pulled her into an embrace. "I'm so glad you're with me, Leanne. Together we can face anything. We'll protect the forest, and we'll honor the pact, but we'll do it on our own terms. We'll make our own future." As they stood there holding each other, the wind seemed to carry away some of the weight that had been pressing down on Leanne's chest. The forest was still there, watching, waiting. But now it didn't seem so ominous. It felt more like a part of the world, a part of the life they had chosen to live. And with that, Leanne realized that they could face whatever challenges lay ahead together. The next few days were spent preparing for what was to come. Leanne and Ethan worked side by side, tending to the ranch and the animals, but there was a new sense of purpose in their work. The land was no longer just something they had to care for. It was something they had to protect. And it wasn't just for them. It was for the future, for the generations that would follow. As they walked through the forest together, Leanne felt a new connection to it. The trees no longer felt like strangers. They felt like old friends, like something that had been with her all along, even when she didn't realize it. And with that connection, she knew she could face whatever the forest demanded. Ethan and Leanne made a pact of their own that day, one that was different from the ancient promise his family had made. It wasn't a pact made out of obligation or fear. It was a pact made out of love. Love for each other, love for the land, and love for the life they had chosen to build. The forest, with all its mysteries and secrets, would always be a part of their lives, but it no longer controlled them. They were no longer afraid of it. They had embraced it, and in doing so they had found a strength they never knew they had. Together they stood at the edge of the forest, hand in hand, ready to face whatever came next. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew one thing for sure. They would face it together, and that was all that mattered.